Peter, the mind-body problem has been one of my great motivators in life. It really made me go into brain research as a student because I was so interested in this question. As a philosopher, how can you help us formulate this in the most effective way?
Well, I think the most effective way is to begin with the question, what are we? And there are various answers to this question. One of them is the Cartesian Platonic answer, according to which we are immaterial things and we bear some kind of causal relation to the living organisms that you see, where we cause things to happen in them, they cause things to happen in us, the immaterial things. But suppose that you think, as I do, that a human being is the living organism. That has certain advantages over the other view, and that it gets rid of the interaction problem. Things are one and the same. There's no question about how they interact. And a lot of people, of course, have wondered how an immaterial thing, without violating conservation laws, could cause things to happen in a material thing. But it remains mysterious still, what is this consciousness that's associated with this organism? It doesn't seem to do any particular work from an evolutionary point of view. As long as the organism moved in the same way and so on, it would have the same advantages as far as reproducing and surviving goes. In fact, how is it even possible for the organism to have conscious states of conscious awareness, or to think thoughts of any sort? These, I think, are great mysteries. I don't know how to answer the question how it's possible for a biological system to have states of consciousness, the whole so-called hard problem of consciousness. The idea that no matter how much we know about the brain, it's not going to be the kind of thing we could learn about the brain by studying it scientifically is not going to explain how conscious states are possible. And I have a great deal of sympathy with that view. But I don't, as some do, take it to imply that we are something other than a physical organism, because I think the difficulty is not really the question, how could a physical thing be conscious, but how could a thing be conscious, or how could consciousness exist at all? I don't see how it helps to solve this great mystery to say that the thing that's conscious is immaterial. Why is that a help? Assuming there could be immaterial things, why is it easier for one of them to be conscious than a material thing?
Well, I think one can answer that because you're defining your immaterial thing as consciousness. So it is a definitional direction that you have.
Well, if you did define it that way, I suppose I could rephrase the question as, why do you think there are such things? But in fact, that's not how immaterial thing is defined. Immaterial thing is defined as the thing that's not material. So at least if you define it that way, what is a material thing? Well, I don't know, a thing made out of elementary particles, a thing that has a mass, a thing that responds to physical forces. An immaterial thing is a thing that doesn't have those properties. Why is that a leg up in the race to consciousness? Why does it help not to have those properties? I can't look at what goes on inside a material thing and think, how does that produce consciousness? Or indeed, does it produce consciousness? Descartes said it doesn't produce consciousness. Consciousness belongs to the immaterial thing. But then we have to wonder what all that wetware in there is for. It can't be all control panel. You know, there must be some other things that it does. But if you assume that it is what's actually producing the consciousness, you have to admit to yourself you don't see how it does it. You don't see how it does that kind of thing. I mean, it's not as if, somebody could say, think 32 moves ahead in a chess game, and somebody else said, I don't see how a brain could have that kind of computational power. Having some degree of computational power is something that it's easy to understand how our brain does. This would be a small mystery, how it had more computational power than you thought. This is a different kind of question. It's the question, how could this collection of molecules actually have this kind of awareness that is my feeling of pain or orange? And indeed, I don't see how it could. In fact, it looks to me as if it couldn't, except for the fact that it does. But then I would say the same thing about an immaterial thing. Although, granted, immaterial things are harder to think about than material things because we can't form convenient mental pictures of them.
Would that put you in a position of a so-called property dualist, where you believe that mental things and physical things are very different, but they're not, the mental thing is not a substance difference?
Well, it's certainly true that the people who call themselves property dualists believe that physical things have two different kinds of properties, physical properties and non-physical properties, and that some, probably all, the mental properties that we have are non-physical properties. But I wouldn't align myself with that view because I have no idea what they mean by non-physical property. I mean, they don't mean a property that isn't a physical thing, right? No property is a physical thing. All properties would be non-physical properties in that sense. They don't mean properties that can belong only to physical things, like having a mass, because they say these properties do belong, some of these non-physical properties do belong to non-physical things. So at that point, one just has to ask, what does this view call? What is a non-physical? What are you saying when you say that a mental property is a non-physical property? I mean, I know what mental properties are. They're properties that entail thought or feeling, properties such that if you have one of them, you're thinking something or feeling something. But I don't know what a non-physical property is in any sense that will serve that thesis.
So how do we divide up the alternative solutions? There's a dualist solution that you mentioned that requires some sort of an interaction. Mm-hmm. And then there are different kinds of physical solutions. Are those the two big categories?
Well, there are dualist solutions that don't require that interaction. And there's of course idealism, which denies the existence of the physical altogether. Right. So there's no interaction problem there.
Right.
Either, though it may. That is, the problems that face Berkeley and idealism are not generally considered in courses of the mind-body problem, but rather in courses in epistemology and so on. That is, the question is, how can we know that there is an external world? Something like that. If you're not willing to be a Berkeleyan idealist, though, and if you want to believe that the mind is a mental substance, then you do face the question of the relation between this immaterial substance and the physical world. Descartes said it was one of interaction. Descartes' follower, Malebranche, said that, no, strictly speaking, the mental substance can't cause anything in the physical world, but when it produces a volition for your arm to move, God causes your arm to move. Leibniz said, oh, it's even more global than that. Actually, both the mental realm and the physical realm are completely deterministic, and God wound them up at the beginning of time to be perfectly coordinated with each other. So there's no causation going on there now, but every time I produce a feeling of an act of will, my arm moves because that's the way God wound things up. All those would seem to be objectionable positions to me.
Yeah, so where are we left?
Well, I think we're left, if you want a taxonomy, you have the two monistic theories, materialism and idealism. You have the dualistic theories, and these differ from each other by their answers to the question, what are the relations that explain the correlation between events in the physical world and events in the mental world? Are they causal or are they something else?
And if you would have a non-causal relationship to create the mental world where the causal direction is just from the physical world to the mental world,
Yes, that's Epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenon is just Greek for byproduct. The mind is a byproduct of what's going on in the body. Your feeling of control over your body is a complete illusion. It's just that whatever physical causes there are for your arm going up in the normal case will produce the sensation that we call having an active will at the moment.
Do you like that?
No. No, I mean, I think, there is a question of course, about what you mean by an act of will. That is, I think acts of will are physical events. But I think they're nonetheless real acts of will for that.
But doesn't it seem, as a materialist, that you are still faced with the trouble, the mystery of the qualitative, the qualia nature of consciousness?
I certainly agree that I am faced with that mystery. I just say it's no bigger a mystery for me in virtue of my being a materialist than it is for everybody else. It's just better hidden in the case of people who accept materialistic theories.
Most people who are materialists go on to assume that materialism is global, that therefore there is no God, there is no non-material world at all. The fact that you do believe in God, does that have any impact on how you view this question of consciousness?
I don't think so. It seems to me a perfectly evident fact of everyday experience, quite independent of religion or theology or anything like that, that we are conscious beings, that we perform acts of will, that we feel pain, that orange looks this way and green looks that way. These are all facts of experience that any philosophy or any scientific theory must take into account. Any philosophy or any scientific theory that denies those facts is in trouble, I think.
With the probability that dualism is correct, which you don't agree with in terms of explaining consciousness, have a higher degree of probability given the fact that there is God versus the worlds in which there were no God?
Well, if God exists, then the possibility of it, then it follows that an immaterial thinking substance is a possibility. Of course, it doesn't follow that a finite immaterial thinking substance is a possibility, and that's what you would need for dualism. It's true that it does show that the three properties, immaterial, thinking, and substance, are a consistent set of properties. That's true. I suppose that's some help for the dualism, but I don't think it makes it more probable that dualism is right, because I don't see how to rule out say the interaction problems. God's kind of interaction, I think, with the world God doesn't properly speaking interact with the world at all. He's not part of the world. He's something that underlies the world, whereas these immaterial things would really be a part of the world as much as sticks and stones, and they would have to have causal influences on things in ways comparable to the way sticks and they have to make things move inside the world.
And for an immaterial thing of our person to make things move in the world, interact with the world, is just something that you reject?
Well, there are certainly problems about conservation laws and the laws of physics. I suppose there's no problem. If you want to say, yeah, we can work miracles. We're immaterial things, and every time we want something to move in the material world, we work a miracle. Yeah, all right, I can't refute that. That's consistent at any rate. Or you could say every time we want to do that, God works a miracle. That's what Malebranche said. But if you're not willing to bring the miraculous into it, then you certainly face difficulties with conservation laws. I don't see how to make things happen without making the law of conservation of energy or momentum false in some physical system.